Can you record for us too tonight, Chris? Okay, great. All right, well, I'll call this special work session to order. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Brandy. All those in favor say aye.
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 All right. Well, there's obviously a big agenda item this evening for equity initiatives. There's a couple of overlapping pieces that wanted to make sure we had some time to discuss and plan for with an eye to looking ahead. So had hoped that we could talk a little bit more about Map Center and some of the plans that Karen and the team have already put into motion with the staff auditing that has happened. That has some interaction with the conversation that Wes and Brandy had with Cynthia probably a month ago now. And also I think intersects with the conversations that we've been having about the next steps with our equity policy, how we identify and stand up a board level committee to help us with the execution of that work. And so those are kind of all the things that are on my mind tonight. I think there is some alignment that needs to happen, and again, hopefully a conversation and some work this evening where we can bring a few pieces together so these don't all feel separate. And I think it's certainly part of our strategy going into the 2020-2021 school year. So that was really my hope with the bulk of the conversation tonight. Karen and I have had some conversation about this. Francis and I have had some conversation about this. Nikki and I have had some conversations about this, but yeah, we haven't really talked about the equity initiatives as a whole board. Again, thanks to Wes and Brandy for notes from their conversation. So yeah, this is really just an opportunity to pull a bunch of pieces together. I think probably it makes sense for Karen to start with some of the conversation and the context from the Map Center and the Ecap, I guess is right there, their terminology, kind of what pieces are in motion there. And then we'll have a chance to talk about some of the other pieces.
Great, thank you so much, Katie, for the introduction, and good evening, everyone. So I hope things aren't going to be confusing, because I'm really not sure what Brandy and Wes, what you all discussed about with the ECAP, because really what I have is really task related about how we need to get started with the equity committee and using the data from the survey, how to make meaning of that with the committee. And then also there are tools on recruitment. So I have logistics from working with Cynthia about really what we need to do in the next few weeks. But I'm not sure if you all garnered some sort of other
Karen, I think go ahead and talk about the scope of the work that you think needs to happen here, and I think
sure. So
interject as necessary.
Okay, so what they're recommending for the Making Meaning session is a 3-hour training with the committee. And so they've done sessions via Zoom, and they have structured it in such a way where it's not sitting straight for 3 hours. It would be Cynthia and another associate, one of the higher ranking associates that would facilitate the conversation. So what the board is needing to do is find a date for that, recruit between 25 to 30 participants.
And Karen, sorry, will you back up and give us kind of the 2-minute spiel about the Ecap process, the purpose behind all of this? Remind us the background here about where we're at.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't know I needed to go back that far. So, so the ECAP, it's an acronym for the Equity Context Analysis Process District Led, because there's different types of ECAPs. So led is when you really take parts of this whole process and use just whatever you feel is appropriate, which is what we've done. So it's a comprehensive data collection that helps the district then look at people, policies, and practices that is resulting in inequitable outcomes to students. So we're really doing a cross section, a sampling of what our stakeholders are thinking about the district. So there are different domains. There's 7 domains that were assessed: climate, environment and resources, leadership and government, continuous improvement and inquiry, instruction and assessment. So that's a nutshell without going too far into the weeds.
And we made a decision earlier this year to start with the internal audit, correct? That the data that's been collected is data from our staff team.
No, we have different stakeholder groups. We were able to do that. Our window was in the spring, pre-COVID, like literally on the heels of COVID. And so we were also able to get information. So I have this right here: admin, staff, and parents. So we have the results and everything to share. That's what would be the core content for the Making Meaning session. And so MAP Center representatives would walk us through that.
Okay, and then the goal for this ultimately is using the data to develop an action plan. Is that right, around our
Yeah.
7 potential areas?
Yeah, those seven areas, those 7 domains.
Okay, great. So that's, I think, part of the context. I think one of the things that I'm struggling with right now is, again, because I kind of have had conversations with these various pieces, and this is a pulling pieces together conversation, is some of the ideas around setting up our own district equity committee. And I think wanting to both take advantage of this opportunity to do something meaningful, to launch a committee, but also recognizing that this committee may not be, something that fully, gets at our long-term strategy. And so that was part of, what I wanted to talk about tonight too. I think Karen shared with me last week that this group, this Making Meaning, task force or something, would include up to 30 people. That feels like
You could. She said, because that wasn't my number. She said 25 to 30. She said it could be smaller, it could be larger. It just depends upon the need and what you all want to work on, what feels appropriate. But I said I have to start with something in terms of presenting this to the board. So I just wanted to interject that real quick.
Great. So there's that piece, and we have sort of this immediate, task ahead of us to take a look at the data. I know, Francis, you and I have had some conversations, and I can't remember if they've been with the broader board too, around this idea of having some community, our community help us to elevate the topics, out of the data, that it isn't seen as only the board, or the board being able to, only select things that, are comfortable for us, or, make us look a certain kind of way or whatever, right? That there is some accountability from an external group. And so I think that's part of, I think maybe at some point I've had a conversation with somebody, on this call around like, well, we'll take a look at the data first, and then, but MAP Center has said, actually, you need this committee to be the first ones to look at the data. And that came out of the Wes and Brandy conversation too. Good. Okay. So that, I think those pieces are, again, just trying to tie all the pieces together. So I think then parallel, we've got this equity policy that we've, approved. We have especially some hopes around looking at the rest of the policies, that the board has approved, through an equity lens. I think using the Ferguson questions, we have some pieces in our policy as well that say we're going to look at certain disaggregated data sets, over the course of, some, whatever our program evaluation sort of rhythm is going to be with that as well. And Nikki has done some additional thinking about what group could help the board to do that. I think in my mind, I'm seeing like a TLC type group, right? That comes together regularly, reflects on data, makes recommendations or presentations up to the board, sort of thing. And so trying to square the idea of trying to launch, and I think, Nikki was pushing us earlier this year around moving up our timeline for putting that group into action. I know she's done some thinking and some drafting of what an ideal kind of charge for that committee could be, and even an application process, potentially that intersects with some of the resources that MAP Center has available to us as well. So Nikki, would you be comfortable talking a little bit about what you've been thinking about and have put to paper too?
Sure. So I sent you all an email. I want to say it was Thursday or Friday of last week. And I was just letting you know that I had been working on the charter and had reached out to an MRH parent who also works at a school in the region and is their like diversity director. And I'm not doing her position justice, so forgive me, but the parent's name is Anna Warbelow, and she reviewed the charter, and I was just putting it together, asking people about it before it was submitted to you all for your review. I think it's ready for that, but that charter is focused solely on our educational equity policy. And then it kind of goes through like the type of group that I'm submitting to you all to consider agreeing that we want to have. It's not a big group. I think it's 16 people altogether. One board member, one alternate board member, one administrative staff to assist with like the agenda and note takings and things like that. And then we have representatives from the community, we have representatives from the high school, and then we have representatives from our MRH staff. And I think I told you all that I had also been doing some work along with Katie with the campaign for Reimagine K through 12 after COVID-19. And that is with like We Power and EdHub STL. And going through that campaign and the programs that they have hosted, I have been more focused on making sure that like our students that are with SSD are being addressed, as well as our custodians. And so I made sure to put in that charter that it's not just teachers that can be on this. It can be our custodians. It could be our cafeteria workers, anybody, secretaries, anybody that works for MRH can have an opportunity to serve on this. So that charter is pretty much just like who we're looking for in our community, which is anyone, and then what their charge is, which is, excuse me, to make sure that they're looking at the equity audits that we get to look at. They're looking at data, and then they're taking that data and they're putting it up against our board policies, practices, and procedures to make sure that we are weeding out any institutionalized bias and addressing it, so we don't have that and we have educational equity. So I think that's about it. Katie, did you want me to?
I think the one thing, Nikki, that you said that I heard you say, but I don't think you meant it this way. You said there would be representatives from the high school. I know you meant student representatives from high
Yes.
school. So that was a part of our conversation, is actually engaging our students on the Educational Equity Committee. And then this isn't necessarily in the documents that Nikki's pulled together, but I think there are models in other parts of our community where there's a core group that makes up the Education Equity Committee, but that it is also a committee that really welcomes community, participation as well. I mean, I think it's important to keep the decision-making portion of a committee fairly lean in this case, but I also know we're going to have more interest than 16 individuals in our district, and not wanting to create something that feels exclusive, or that this is only a group that's going to deliberate in behind closed doors or something about equity issues for the district, but that this is something that could be much more robust in the participation of community, even if the recommendations that come to the board are made by a specific group that is applying to be part of that process. So again, trying to share with you all the stuff that's rattling around in my brain. I'm feeling a little bit of tension between both the idea of starting this longer term committee that is our Education Equity Committee, and really charged with helping us stay true to our policy and live up to our policy, and then this need for a more immediate task force sort of thing. I think there's probably some opportunities to use one to seed the other, or to have some synergies there, but I didn't want to think through that with only my spinning brain here too. So
is it possible to merge the two, just like you just explained to us how we have this core group, but then we could have community members come through? Couldn't we just put the two together? So we have this large group, but then Educational Equity Committee members are going to be the ones that move forward with whatever is determined out of this, task force, if you will.
Yeah, and it probably would be helpful, and Karen, I know I cut you off earlier, but to hear about what the specific tasks are that you need and that are part of the process. I know you mentioned you have some jobs that need to get done by this group, and probably the nearer term.
Well, it's all if you all decide to use the data. Really, the springboard with the ECAP is to use that data and to then give you an idea of what people are thinking about the school district. And it's a way to start versus it being the committee. It's about a process to look at equity, to see if our practices are equitable. So really, if you want, it's not a body or thing. It is just a way to look at your work. You could apply whatever structure you want, and you can use that as one of your activities. At least you have this data, and it could then branch off into different things, because the data then shows that there's some discrepancies in some areas, and then you can dig and study from that. But again, it's just giving you that background and the tools so you can begin equitable practices and looking at it, you know, through a continuous school improvement way with an equitable lens. So it's just training you to look differently at the work.
I mean, that seems like that would be right on point with what, you know, the committee members would do.
Nikki,
And it would
I
be
know you
fine.
had some thoughts about the committee needing some similar grounding. I think in some similar ways that like the board went through training with the MAP Center, you know, and for us to have some common language and things like that. I do, yeah. I mean, I wonder, Karen, if you have more detail about what that making meaning training is about. I mean, I would assume it's fairly specific to like reviewing the data that's been collected, but I would obviously hope that it has lessons that could be transferred to data that we have access to or things like that. I'm not sure what exactly is for us to know about that training before it actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can delve more into that, but essentially is what you're saying. You have to have a grounding session and an understanding of what you're going to be looking at and what does it mean? What does it mean to look for discrepancies and disparities with the access to resources? And so the trainer then has to spend time trying to do that, and they would have like affinity groups potentially, if we have that diversity in the groups, to discuss some of these things. But absolutely, you do have to have common vocabulary, some understanding of the process and how to then go to the next step. How do you make those recommendations to the board? Because that's another thing. You don't want people thinking because they're on this committee and they see these things, what is your responsibility? What is your role? Because the charge is critical. And that was one of the things, Katie, I've said to you, you know, we got to get clear as a board stepping into this. What do you expect out of this? Coming from your governing body here, from the folks who are participating, because then that will then transfer into what their role will be. So you don't want to have any frustrated people if we're not on the same page and clear about how we're going to engage together. So that's why I was thinking the tools and some training to help us look at data and then become independent thereafter, because they're teaching you how to do the very thing that Nikki was talking about.
Any reactions? I know some of you are hearing pieces of this for the first time or being reminded of things that we've talked about. Seems like 5 years ago, but it was only, you know, last fall or something like that. So want to make sure I'm leaving space for questions, comments, reflections on what you've heard.
Yeah, I would just echo kind of what Karen said there. I feel like we still have work to do as a board, and I don't want to abdicate that work. I don't want it to seem like we're abdicating that work completely to a committee and a single board member or an alternate sort of carry on. I think it's important that we be clear on how we're going to measure the implementation of this equity policy across multiple different spheres and spectrums around our overall policy. So I think this committee could be hugely helpful in bringing that data to us. But I think it's also critical that it not be the only data input that we use to make decisions about whether or not this equity policy is being implemented broadly within our district. So I just think we as a group should always strive to try to continue to do more work and figure out what our, I mean, I know we do the equity audits and we bring all that forward. I think there's some slight changes to that we could bring, or uniformity to that we could bring, and then maybe even like some sort of summative report that we're issuing to the community in some form or fashion about, like, this is the work that we're doing and done, and this is the progress that we have or have not made. You know, I just think it's important that we as a full board also own that and do the work related to that. But I do think the community input is hugely valuable.
My only input on what I heard just a few minutes ago on process is that if we engage in a process which involves interpreting data, we have to have the same level of training and understanding of the tools we have to interpret that data across the entire group of folks involved. So I don't know that we can actually have a process where, for example, the board gets trained first, and then we form this larger committee, because then we would have to train those folks into how to look at the data. I'm just thinking that it would probably be better to get the group first and then train all of us at once. And then bring out the data from the actual surveys, because we'll all have the same tools in our hands at that point. That was the only contradiction I was hearing in the discussion so far.
To Francis's point, I think we will get to what you were talking about, like the board having to do some work and some deep digging as well. I guess I believe that we'll get there because of the structure. So the committee is looking at things and submitting it to us, the board, for with recommendations. We still have to do our due diligence and look at what they're recommending. Do you see what I'm saying, Francis? So like, we're not just going to take what they're saying and go with it. Like, we still have to look at what they're presenting to us and discuss it as well and dig into that. So that's why I think we will get to, you know, what you're talking about.
I think that all makes sense, but I think it should be clear what it is in terms of input that we're seeking from that committee. Does that make sense? Because
yeah, that makes sense.
If we choose to not look at something the committee brings forward, I don't want it to be, I think there should be a rationale as to why we chose to go down this road and not these other points that you brought up. And I think that work needs to be clear. I don't know if I'm clear exactly, and I could be alone in that, as to how to guide the committee to give the information that we're looking for.
That I think that comes in the, I think if you look at the charter and have time to review it and put whatever input you want in it, but that's the point of that. Because I remember when I gave it to Katie, she was just like, you know, I want to make sure that the charge is clear for the committee. So it's not just like, the charter doesn't solely just, you know, tell us how this group of people are supposed to, what we're looking for, where throughout our community we're going to get these people for the committee. It's also telling them, like, okay, this is your responsibility. This is what we're asking you to do. So I think it's in there, but I think we all just need to look at it together so you guys can have input into it.
If I can make a suggestion on that, I think the language is probably really clear. I do think we could use similar processes that we use for things like long-range planning, facility, you know, other things where we get community input on, and those usually require a few meetings of like the full board, and just to understand and agree upon kind of how the process is going to work, since we've never convened a group like that before. So I think the combination of those two things it's important that I agree it's important we should do. And I think we have some experience in doing, but we have to be really thoughtful and thorough, I think, about how we phrase that and how we shape that to get the input we're looking for. So
I agree with you.
Maria, were you going to say something? Thought I saw you.
Well, I mean, I think Francis stated it well, and you too, Dickie. I just think that this could go in many different directions, and I think we really, really have to get super duper clear as a board of what our expectation is before we open it up much wider. And you know, I really don't have anything else more to add than Francis and Nikki have had.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that the charter document is in a place where it can be shared, and maybe we can bring it up here on shared screen momentarily, but I do want to hear more from Karen's, you know, on the more immediate term work, because I think I'm still formulating my thoughts around how I think, again, all this work intersects. I think based on, you know, some of the things that Francis just said, I could see this Ecap group coming together and kind of setting some guardrails that then the equity committee, you know, operates within later on, or that it is a same group, or, you know, I'm still open to how it forms and the interplay between the two tasks here.
So I guess, Katie, for me, I didn't know that there was another group. So to me, I think it's one group that does this. So, and again, like I said before, it's a process on how to think about the work, to speak to what Francis was emphasizing. We have to be really clear on how we engage or how we start. So we're all on the same page. I can't say that what the ECAP is going to provide is any different than what Nikki has proposed. So, and also, again, I have data from the people, and it's a process that the map can help us then think about what the survey results yielded. So I don't feel that anything, the structure would be any different than what Nikki is saying. So I don't really have a whole lot more to say. I just think there's similarities, and I didn't know that there were two groups. I just thought there would be a group, and this is just information and how to process and do an analysis.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, that's what I'm saying. I don't necessarily think it's a good idea to have two groups with fairly similar charges either. So, but I'm not sure what timeline makes the most sense. You know, I think we need to obviously set the pace that makes the most sense for us, but also recognizing that we've got some community pressures and accountabilities, as well as the scheduling of the MAP Center staff and our own staff who have a pretty interesting fall that will be upon us here shortly too. So,
well, I guess what Cynthia understood from the conversation with Wes and Brandy is that the board was ready to move forward. So that's how I stepped into this conversation, because I haven't heard from Brandy and what, like, I really wasn't sure what that was. I just was having a conversation with Cynthia, and she's like, okay, they're ready to go. We want to keep the momentum. I think she told Wes and Brandy that she was going to talk to me, and we were going to talk about, okay, here are the next steps on how to get started. So I was talking very specifically under the understanding that y'all were ready to go, y'all talked, this is what you need. But after listening to this dialogue, I can say to you that I think there's flexibility in terms of what the board needs in order to feel confident in training and making sure this is rolled out in a way that you all can sustain it and it's helping and not causing harm. So I don't feel that there's pressure coming from them to get it done. I think there's a misunderstanding here, because again, I just heard from Cynthia because she talked to you all, and I haven't talked to you all after I talked to Cynthia. So I just thought we needed to go, and I didn't think there were two groups. I didn't. So I apologize for miscommunicating because really.
No, I mean, again, to your point, we haven't had the chance to really sit down and all talk about all these pieces. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, where it's fallen on the agenda the past couple of times it's been on the agenda, it hasn't.
Everybody's tired.
When our best thinking has happened, right?
Yeah.
So,
it's certainly true that I don't know. I can't speak for Brandy, but I know when I had met with when the three of us met, I did not have it in my mind that we were pursuing another avenue. So, yeah. So, but if we are, that's great. I don't know, but the only thing I would just throw into this mix is that if we're going to continue with the MAP Center, we need to reestablish our memorandum of understanding because it expires this month. So.
Yeah, and that's my understanding too, Wes. Since we had our initial training with the MAP Center, we've been saying we want to keep working with them. That's the relationship we want to keep building. This is where we want, to flow from. So as far as I know, that has never changed, which is why we had that follow-up with Cynthia and are here now. So yeah, it should just be spinning from that.
great. So then I'll just voice one other concern that I have around this whole thing, and I think Karen's probably ready to respond to it, though, is I think that we are going to have a lot of community members who are really interested in this work. I am not sure that we're going to have an immediate outpouring of folks who have a lot of diversity amongst themselves. And so I want to make sure we're being super thoughtful about who we make space for at this table, and that we are, intentional in a way that we probably have not before been able to be. And so, again, in conversations with Nikki about, the potential of setting up this board level committee, thinking about actually putting out, some sort of application process, being very explicit about asking folks to share identities that they, self-identify as, so that we're certain to have at least information to know, that it's not only, 40 something white ladies like me that we're, staffing this whole committee with, or, whatever group of people look exactly like, somebody else on the board. So that I think is, just something I want to voice. I want us to talk about that and what our expectations are and what supports I think that we need for this as well. So Karen, are there tools for recruitment that that MAP Center has? And I think that's obviously some of where we're going to have to start with this is once we are charged, who are we recruiting, right?
Yeah, I strongly recommend that. I was on the e-forum. This is a resource that stays there for us. There's a lot on there, but it was not there, and I wasn't able to connect with Cynthia today, but I do know there are documents or tools, quote unquote tools, available for recruitment. So there's considerations to think about different social and cultural identities that they recommend should sit at the table. And I also spoke to, it was pre-COVID, so it seems like years ago, but in the fall of the school year last year, a central office administrator in Kansas, and they just started their committee, and they shared their document because they had an online form. I think it was on their website. So like it would push out an article and would promote it, and there's a link and people could fill it out. And we would also be very clear that there is a review process. We're looking for these different identities, and then the board will follow up with you. So, you know, I have examples, essentially is what I'm trying to say, on how to invite participants to sit in the group.
Great, that's helpful, I think, and again, aligned with conversations that have happened. Something I'd be curious to talk through with the board as well, though, is around, and Karen, I'm not sure if the Ecap process requests that district staff would be involved in the process. I assume it does, but I'm not sure if that's the case. I also, you know, I'm just curious what the board's reaction is around potentially making space for some maybe non-traditional representation from our district staff. And, you know, I know a little bit, I think, about how we, you know, identify teacher representatives or building level representatives for things like CBTF or TLC. That also feels sometimes like it's the usual suspects. And, you know, I'm not always, I don't, you know, I'm not in the weeds of how these assignments are made building by building, but I do wonder if there's anything that would preclude us from thinking a little bit more creatively about the recruitment of staff as well.
Katie, are you referring to like custodians and secretaries? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's both that, and I also am not sure, you know, again, I will have to take a look at what Ecap recommends. If they're saying, you know, it must be, you know, the building principal that participates in this, or is it, you know, that we must have, you know, 3, you know, teachers on the committee. You know, I'm some of that kind of stuff I'm curious about. I am also curious about yeah, staff like cafeteria or custodians, and recognize that they're in slightly different spots with how we compensate them, and potentially how we would need to compensate them for, you know, this kind of extra duty sort of thing.
Yeah, well, just for background knowledge, and not that it truly has anything to influence this conversation, but they, our support staff, they have a leadership meeting monthly, similar to the teacher union, with central office administrators. So there is leadership that has been nurtured through the district as well. For Chris, what is this, like 3 years now? About 3 years. So we have a process pretty much similar to what we do with teachers. So I just, background knowledge.
Does that though, if they're in there with their superiors, can they speak their mind? I mean, that's one of the equity issues that needs to be discussed when we talk about these things, right?
I think I can speak to at least experience on that committee that Karen referred to. In a word, yes. They have not had a problem telling us what they think. And quite honestly,
I didn't hear that. Mm-hmm.
In all seriousness, I mean, we've talked about some pretty complex and difficult issues from time to time.
Yes.
And we've gotten, I think we've had very good luck with the staff members that have been on that committee, and that we have very thoughtful dialogue and we come to reasonable conclusions. They've appreciated and felt valued as a result of this committee. And
yeah,
I think it would be a great idea and a great experience for them. And I trust it.
It's like a CBTF type committee. Is that what y'all are referring to?
No, it's,
no?
we
Okay.
have monthly teacher, I call them teacher leaders, because not everyone is in a union, but I want to make sure there's still leadership. I don't know, it's a communication thing, it's an equity thing. But anyway, it's our teacher union meeting. So it talks about really their working conditions. Bottom line. And I have all the administrators come because I want to make sure if they have questions about communications or why aren't certain things being communicated, or a lot of issues, equity issues about payment and vacation days, and I mean a lot about that. So we have representatives for paraprofessionals, food service, transportation, custodians, technology, and administrative assistants and nurses. So those are all the representatives. So it takes a minute because we didn't have it. Like I didn't inherit that leadership group, so I had to develop it. And Chris really articulated well how effective it is. And we've had some courageous conversations, and it was done very well. I mean, it was at a very high level, very professional level. So anyway, all that being said, the reason why I brought it up, I don't think it would be a hard thing. I think they would be excited about it. One person comes to mind right away who would want to sit at that table.
Absolutely.
One, like, I'm like, I got you right now. That's not an issue. I don't think you have to worry about them being interested or finding someone to participate. I think they'd say it's about time. This person would.
And that, I think you're right, Karen. I think the response would be exactly what it was when you formed that group, because that leader group has been in place since, I think it's been like 19 years.
Yeah.
So maybe even 20. And what we noticed was there was, speaking of equity, there was an underrepresented group, and that was our support staff.
Yep.
And, we just kind of took that introspective look and said, why aren't we hearing from them?
Mm-hmm.
Karen put that group into place. So, and I agree with you too, Karen. There's at least 2-3 members on that group that would say, yes, let's do
Yes. Yeah. So they have been elevated, and that leadership and that thinking and facilitating conversations, even difficult conversations with their colleagues, that has happened, and it's continuing. And I think it is a natural progression to have them folded in. So it's not a worry. It would be expected.
Great. Glad we can think a little outside the box on that as well. Great. So it sounds like we've had a little bit of chance to talk through some of the potential confusions. And again, I recognize that I'm in the middle of a lot of this stuff, so tying the threads back around. I think being able to see the thinking that's gone into a charge for what Nikki and I have been placeholder calling the Education Equity Committee, would be good for folks to be able to kind of read through. It's only a couple of pages of document. We can take a look at that and kind of maybe revisit that after folks have had a chance to look at it and to potentially put some feedback or some questions into the document, and be able to maybe get some resources on what we would look for a recruiting tool or some sort of application or something like that. I know, again, Nikki and I have put some initial thought to that. It would be good to norm that against some practices that have been used in other places as well, if the MAP Center has some things to look at there.
I just want to.
Can I? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Wes. Thank you. I appreciate you. Karen, like what MAP Center is suggesting, I'm pretty sure I heard you say that, but I just want to make sure I'm clear. Like we can take the information they give us, but all of us can just decide like, okay, that doesn't fit well with us, or this does fit well with us. Like it's not something that's just stringent and we have to do exactly what they're doing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's not rigid. I don't roll like that. I never partner with organizations that say, okay, here's something that's packaged and plop it down and you have to do it that way. we have flexibility with this.
Okay.
So you can say, okay, you have this framework that you have developed. I strongly recommend, though, getting started, we'd have some guidance, and we can say, here's this information. And then when you go through it, be like, nah, I'm not feeling this. This is now COVID era. Because that was kind of my concern about it, because school is different than what it was. I mean, drastically. And that was what I would add. And that's something that we could potentially talk about. But this is where people were. And you can always say, well, there's a difference now. Maybe we need to revisit this because school is different. But I don't want to say safe, but it's contained. It's a way to start thinking about it together, and you can train together looking at the same thing. Because people think differently, and why I felt that the board really needed to have an equity policy and a definition of what it is, because people come to the table thinking things differently. And a lot of times they have good hearts, but they're also thinking about their own as well. And so we really have to be careful if you're going to sit on that committee at the table. As a lot of us, I love your perspective, but it's not just about you. It's about us. So it's flexibility. I just need to know, and Katie, thank you so much for making this a moment, because I need to work with them and say, hey, this is what we're thinking. Because I custom made this process because it's much bigger. And I said, well, no, this is what we need right now where we are in the organization. So the point is, yes, there's flexibility. No one's forcing us to be a certain kind of way. It's a process on how to think and what you're dealing with in your organization.
I appreciate you bringing up, how COVID has changed some things too. I think we all have seen how COVID has laid bare the inequities that a lot of, like you said, it's not just inequities that, maybe I would see. It's what we all see, what affects all of us. So absolutely. I definitely want to make sure that comes into this conversation when we're talking about what the choice is going to be for this committee.
Yeah.
I just wanted to interject a concern. I came up listening to what we were talking about here in terms of recruitment for these various committees. When we go about the process of putting together a questionnaire for recruitment, we've got to be real careful that the questions we ask don't drive a certain non-inclusive or non-diverse group together, rather than getting as wide open a diversity as we can. You understand what I'm saying? We got to be careful about the questions we ask, because we don't want the responses to lock us into what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
You mean only people with PhDs can apply because it's so lofty or something like that?
Well, I'm wondering if maybe rather than questions, we might need to consider having a survey so that we can get the Gaussian curve we're looking for, rather than, I don't know. That's what I'm thinking.
Well, as a leadership group, you all can decide how you want to roll it out. I mean, those are the things that you have to think through, and you really need to think them through. So it's real. And you're not going through the motions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
To Wes's concern, I mean, I'm wondering, and Katie and I had talked about this, like, what do you all think about having, if let's say we did do an application, but when we look at them, it's blind to us. So we're not seeing any names, we're not seeing any email addresses, we're just looking at their responses. Just throwing that out there.
But see, the problem that creates is if potentially we end up the same thing. If we're only looking at responses, then we end up picking responses from people who all look a certain way or are a certain way, and it was unintentional, but it still has the result of not bringing everybody to the table. And what I found as we're learning about equity, right, one of the things is we tend to favor people that speak like us or do things like we, reference things like we would. And that can be a disparity as well, because then you're picking maybe people that are on the same education level unintentionally. Maybe discussing it with the MAP Center, how do we set it up
Yes.
so that we've got people from all avenues covered, and participating, yet still trying to be as random as possible, but ensuring that we're bringing everybody that we want at the table, which is just different races, different genders, different, we want people that have disabilities, people that don't,
Yes.
people, some of everybody. How do we be all inclusive and random at the same time?
Right, because if we don't have the confrontation available in the room, we won't be addressing the issues we need to address.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I agree with that wholeheartedly. I do agree that we should seek guidance from MAP Center because they have more experience and knowledge in this. But I don't know if I agree with that. I think that people that want to be on this committee, want to do this work, understand, what our goal is. So I don't know. I just respectfully disagree, but that's pretty much it.
Well,
What
what I'm getting at is, though, if we don't really represent our entire community, whether they agree with us or not, if we don't have them in the room. That's all I'm saying.
Right.
I hear you.
And what I was really saying is just that we can talk to the MAP Center about suggestions on how to do that. I'm not saying we let them pick, but we think, the point is we're trying to make sure that we are being random, all inclusive, yet we don't end up with everybody looking the same in the room. It sounds like we don't really know how to accomplish that right now. So let's seek guidance on how to accomplish it.
Yes, guidance on how to develop the process. And I think if we don't do that work on the front end, you're going to have a hot mess later.
Yeah.
And we do have them there and it exists, and we can, lean on them for that, really just on the setting things up.
Great. I don't necessarily think we have to spend too much more time on this particular piece tonight. I'm glad that the urgency Karen was feeling was only imposed by us, that it isn't something with a contractor, or I mean, obviously that data won't be evergreen, but so we'll want to be able to look at it in the not so distant future. But yeah, the sense that in some ways it's data from a different time, because it was pre-COVID as well, is good to remember. Great.
So how are we landing?
Yeah.
What are the next steps, and how would you like for me to proceed? I know there's hunger for an appetite for the recruitment, like the logistics on that. But
Yeah.
Is there a timeline? Did you want a making meeting conversation?
So do we need our committee before we have the making meeting?
Well, and I think Brandy and Wes, you can weigh in on this. I think that's what they recommend in order for it to be authentic. We're learning it together, and you all aren't like driving it, but it isn't like something bad is going to happen to the board if you all really feel for your community and where you all with your learning that it would be best if maybe the board has a making meeting on the data and then we have a committee. And I can have that conversation with her.
I asked Cynthia that pretty specifically, and she pretty strongly stated that we should all hear the data at the same time, board and group members, everybody, because otherwise we run the risk of having our internal biases create interpretations on the data before we bring the community in.
Yeah, what he said.
So I think what we need to do, what I'm hearing the next steps is we need to get clear on what our charge for this committee is. And so
Yeah.
I think Nikki does have a draft that's ready for the board to review. Nikki, I think you could go ahead and email that out, whenever we'll add some time to just reflect on that at the July board meeting. I don't think we need to spend a ton of time, but I think in some similar ways that we usually, look at something and then come back and vote on it, at a future meeting, I would like to, bring it forward for just questions and comments. I think the other piece is some of just the preliminary conversations we've had around like what kind of recruitment or selection criteria might we have. Karen, I think both of those things could be shared, the drafts that we have could be shared with Cynthia or the MAP Center, for her to provide feedback or recommend resources based on where our thinking is at, would be helpful. And then, so like I said, we'll hope that everybody on the board has a chance to, read and reflect on what Nikki has pulled together, have a chance to hear some feedback from Cynthia, and then create some space at our next meeting for just any questions that brings up, so that I think then we can move forward with recruitment potentially in August.
Got it. That's great. I think that's a good plan. Well, can I say, so again, I'm kind of misunderstood my role this evening, so I want to apologize for the things that I put on the agenda. I really don't want to talk about these things because I think it's too much.
Okay.
So I'm being a little overzealous here. We don't need to talk about that.
Do we need to talk about the student town hall? That's like the one other thing that's maybe a little time sensitive?
Oh, I'm working on that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, because we just talked last week, y'all. Okay,
Yeah,
so
I don't remember what
give me
day
a
it is.
minute. I got folks on vacation.
Okay.
I'm on it.
Okay,
Then
great.
we got to meet next week. So I'm
Okay.
on it.
Great. All right. Hey, we don't have to make these 3-hour work sessions. They can be 1-hour work sessions. All right. So we'll move on to the next agenda item, which I think is Chris's item. Thanks for hanging out with us for an hour, Chris and Ed.
No problem. I'll take your cue, Katie, and get through this quickly. I wanted to take a few moments and catch you up on where we are with the deal that is the $30 million bond issue, the bond sale. So just to rattle off a few dates to you, we are in the early stages of putting that deal together. The timeline is accelerated, aggressive is probably the best word, but we're going to get it done and we're going to close this deal. We're scheduled to close on 9/2, so September 2nd. Working backwards from there, there's a bunch of stuff in there that I got to do that you don't need to worry about, like responding and signing off on documents and such. But the closing draft documents, the draft closing documents will be circulated on 8/12. The bonds will price on 8/11. That's the night that you agreed to schedule a work session. That's the one where Lorenzo comes and tells us how the bond sale went. So leading up to that, the next real important deadline is, well, there's two actually. On next Tuesday, I have a call with Standards & Poor's to discuss they call it the Due Diligence Call, and that's where we discuss the district finances and where they collect both written and verbal data to give us a credit rating. So our current credit rating is AA-, which is fantastic. I'm excited to see what happens with this credit rating. So, a little competitive streak in me. I'd like for that to go up, but we'll see. And in any event, we have not had problems selling bonds at all with a strong AA- rating. So no worries there. Then on the 31st of July, we'll receive that rating. So I'll share with the board what that rating was. And again, the bonds sell on the 11th and we'll close on the 2nd. So it's all coming together quickly. I had a conversation with Lorenzo. One of the important things that we do when we sell these bonds is we have to structure the deal, as they say. And how are we going to put it together? What's the composition of it? So after Stiefel analyzed our debt service, our current debt service, and looked at our project goals and those amounts. They looked at the whole package, our capital debt that we have remaining, and they are recommending that we do a $30.5 million face value new money refunding. So I'll break it down. So it breaks down into two parts: a $28.5 million bond issue for the project. Now, the cool thing about this is because of the super low interest rates, as they say, cheap money right now, there's a 10% bond premium. So what that basically means is we can sell $28.5 million worth of bonds, and we can generate roughly, after cost of issuance, $30.4 million in proceeds. So that's a fantastic opportunity. The refunding part of that will refund our, it will refund our 2011 lease purchase agreement that we have on the books, our 2017 COPS, as well as a 2010A GO bond that we have on the books that's callable now. So all this put together, we can do face value 30.5 million that will generate a production of 31.6 million. So in a nutshell, what I'm saying is we can deposit $30.4 million in project funds, which is where our project has now been scaled, with sufficient contingencies if there were overruns. I talked to Julie about that this morning, Julie Villa from Intner about that this morning. And we can also pay off all of our capital debt and refund one of our current issues for a savings of 3.25% or $53,000 in present value. So basically paying off more debt service quicker. So I did have a real candid conversation with Julie Villa about the funding of the project. And the question was pointedly asked, is this enough to get our goals? And she said, absolutely it is. That's how we've been planning this the whole time. And that's inclusive of the infrastructure projects that you voted on in the last meeting. Where there is a pause where we need to think just a little bit is if we need something to change mid-project, we wouldn't necessarily have the flexibility to just add a big thing. We would have to take something away in order to add. We, however, do have contingency sufficient. Sorry, my hands are right by the camera. We do have sufficient contingencies built in to accommodate things that unforeseen things. We just wouldn't be able to add, hey, we need 9 new classrooms. Let's throw 9 more new classrooms in there. We wouldn't be able to do that. And nor would that be appropriate. So what I'm recommending to the board is that we move forward with this new money refunding, deposit the amount of money that we need, $30.4 million, which is slightly north of what we've been planning for, to our project fund for the Prop E projects. Also do this refunding, pay off all of our capital debt, refund one of our general obligation bonds that are on the books and callable. And all that said, on the operating side of the budget, where in my opinion, it's hard to get operating budget back, this gives us that opportunity, and that'll save us roughly, approximately, the amortization is different every year, but P&I will save us about $334,000 annually through 2027. So that's money we get back into the operating budget, which makes, I think, everybody, including me, happy. So I just need your consensus, agreement, nods, thumbs that I can move forward with that structure and get Lorenzo and Becky on it. We've run all this. I should also say this has all been run by Sean Flynn at Gilmore and Bell, our bond attorneys, and they are green lighting this and say that there are no problems with structuring the deal in this way, and we've got the go ahead.
Great.
Brandy, how'd I do?
Good job.
You got 2 thumbs up from the treasurer. So, And
You almost never get an opportunity to pay off bonds and increase your operating cash flow. So,
Yeah.
yay.
Yeah, the bond premium is significant. I was quite pleased by that.
Hey, Chris, for the people in the back of the room, can you once again repeat how much that savings would be on an annual basis?
$334,000.
Thank you.
Ed, you can do that press release whenever you want on that one if you need to.
And it's also worth noting again that that's a 3.25% savings on the general obligation bond that we would be refunding. So it's saving taxpayers, again, just a little north of $58,000 right out of the gate. So sounds like a triple win to me.
Where do we
Chris.
sign?
Yes, thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
We like these kind of updates.
yeah, that's just an update. We'll obviously be voting on that, like you said, in August when Lorenzo comes in front of us. So great. So then do I have a motion to go into executive session?
Get off of mute. I move to enter executive session in accordance with section 610.021, subsection 2, and section 610.022 of the revised statutes of Missouri on July 7, 2020 for the following specific reasons: real estate matters.
Second.
Thank you, Nikki and Wes. All those in favor say aye so Maria can see you.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, everybody understands. Chris, are you sending us a new link or is it just in the, you're muted?
I'm so good about that too. It's in that first agenda item on the executive session. If the link is broken by chance, just stand by your email and I'll send a new one quickly.
Great,
Great.
thanks.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you signed on there momentarily.